Have you ever had the feeling of waking up and not remembering your own name? Of looking around and realizing that everything seems right, but something inside you screams that it isn't? I saw it happen. 3 people on the same night in the same city, with the same emptiness in their eyes, as if someone had erased a piece of their soul. And the strangest thing, they all returned at the same time. 2:37 a.m. Not a minute more, not a minute less. Time simply stopped. My name is Katherine Moore, and for years I've investigated cases where the human mind itself becomes the battlefield. But this one was different. In Santa Mirella, a town that seems to exist off the map, I found something that can't be explained by logic, nor by faith. A phenomenon that erases memories, manipulates emotions, and leaves invisible traces on the body and mind. And the worst part is, the more I tried to understand it, the more I realized it was also watching me. If you're listening to this story, perhaps the sound reaches you as it reached me, discreetly, almost imperceptibly. But be careful, because sometimes forgetfulness isn't an accident. It's an invitation. And before we begin, I want you to tell me something. Where are you watching this video from? I ask because you never know. Perhaps I've already investigated a case right there, much closer than you imagine. That night, the phone rang differently. The sound was higher pitched, almost as if the urgency crossed the line before I even answered. On the other end, a trembling, measured voice pleaded with me to listen. 3 people had disappeared without a trace, and when they returned, they remembered nothing. Not names, not places, not even their own reflection in the mirror. It was as if they had woken up in a life they didn't recognize. As I listened to each word, I felt that familiar shiver run down my spine, the premonition that something extraordinary was about to happen. The woman said it all began in a secluded little town, one of those that time seems to have forgotten. I wrote down every detail, even the vaguest ones, trying to find logic in it. But there was something wrong with her silence. A silence that seemed to hide more than any sentence could say. I hung up the phone and stood there, staring at the recorder on the table, as if it too had heard something I hadn't noticed. 3 missing people. 3 erased memories. A single night. I wondered how many truths can fit into a hole in the human mind. Sometimes forgetting is a defense mechanism. Other times, it's proof that someone meddled where they shouldn't have. And deep down, I already knew. This wasn't a simple case of collective amnesia. I grabbed my coat, my notebook, and the necklace I always wear before leaving, a sort of ritual before plunging into the unknown. Outside, the rain began to fall rhythmically, as if trying to tell me something I wasn't yet ready to understand. And while the sound of the raindrops mingled with my thoughts, a question echoed in my mind. What happens to memories when they decide to run away? The road seemed endless, a thin strip of asphalt cutting through nothing. The trees leaned as if trying to watch me pass, and the GPS kept recalculating the route, as if the city itself didn't want to be found. When I finally saw the rusty sign with the name Santa Mirella, a chill ran through my stomach. The air there seemed denser, heavier, and even the wind sounded tired. Something in that stillness told me that time had stopped or given up. Upon entering the city, I noticed that almost all the windows were closed, as if the residents preferred to spy on the world through cracks. The streets were too clean, the kind of cleanliness that stems not from zeal, but from fear. There were faded posters from old festivals, empty shop windows, and a clock in the main square, stopped at 2:37 a.m. The same time the witnesses had mentioned on the phone. Coincidence? I never really believed them. A man was watching me from across the street, sitting on a wooden bench, cigarette lit and gaze distant. When I approached, he looked away, murmuring something about the night that erased everything. That was enough for me to know that the subject was taboo. At the police station, the sheriff greeted me with suspicion, as if he had expected my arrival, but would have preferred that I hadn't come. His tone said more than words. Some things are better left in the dark. I stayed at an old inn, where the clock in the hallway also showed 2:37 a.m. The owner, a woman with a soft voice and troubled eyes, served me coffee and asked if I slept well on quiet nights. I just smiled. But deep down, something in me knew that the silence of that city wasn't empty. It was a kind of sound you hear when fear decides to whisper. And that morning, I would have my first taste of it. I met the 3 victims at the city hospital, if I can even call them victims. They were alive, breathing, walking. But something about them seemed missing. Their gaze was hollow, as if they had forgotten the very meaning of existence. The nurse told me that the doctors found no physical trauma, nothing to justify the memory loss. It was as if they had simply been switched off for a while, and then switched on again. I spoke with the first one, Elisa, a woman in her early 30s, a teacher. She was holding a blank notebook, drawing circles with her fingertip, without realizing it. When I asked what she remembered, she only murmured, "A sound. And blue lights." Then nothing. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from confusion. As if she were trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces that never existed. There was something profoundly human in that emptiness. The second, Lucas, was a delivery driver. He had old scars on his wrists and a crooked smile that appeared at inopportune moments. He said he woke up in the middle of the road, not knowing where he was, with his watch stopped at 2:37 a.m. He swore he heard a constant buzzing, even days later. "As if someone were still inside my head," he said. I wrote down every word, but the sound of his voice seemed familiar, and that bothered me more than it should have. The third, a 19-year-old girl named Bruna, cried whenever she saw her own reflection. She said the mirror lied, that it wasn't her there. There was a pattern in all of them. The same time, the same blackout, the same feeling of being watched. And the more I listened to them, the more I realized that this emptiness wasn't a simple lapse. It was an echo. Something or someone was still calling them back. It was on the second day in Santa Mirella that I noticed the strangest pattern of all. Every clock I found, whether on the wall of the inn, on the wrists of witnesses, or on the church bell, showed exactly the same time, 2:37 a.m. None of them started working again. It was as if time, that night, had decided to stop and observe what was happening. The air around those frozen hours seemed different, denser. Almost alive. At the police station, I requested the case reports and noticed that the camera recording also stopped at 2:37 a.m. Not a second before, not a second after. Everything, absolutely everything, had ceased at that point. When I asked the local technician what could cause this, he simply replied, "The system didn't crash. It was interrupted." That sounded like a warning, not an explanation. As if someone or something had cut the line between the past and the present. I returned to the central square, where the public clock still stood motionless, rusty, its hands pointing to the same instant. I took a picture, and only then did I realize that the captured image showed something different. A shadow in the reflection of the glass, right behind me. There was no one there. I reviewed the photo countless times, and that dark shape seemed to move subtly with each zoom, as if it didn't like being observed. I felt a chill run down my spine. That night, while reviewing my notes, I heard the sound of my wristwatch. Tick-tock. For the first time since I arrived, it was working again, and the dial showed 2:37. Coincidence? Impossible. I felt the same buzzing described by the witnesses, a low, almost human noise, whispering beneath the sound of time resuming its movement. It was at that moment that I realized someone wanted me to remember, and at the same time to forget. The street where it all happened was on the outskirts of Santa Mirella, between an old warehouse and a radio repair shop. At first glance, nothing stood out, just a narrow, silent street, forgotten by progress. But something bothered me. No camera recorded the disappearances. Neither public nor private. They all failed at exactly the same minute. The feeling was that the space had been erased from reality for a few moments. I went to one of the nearby houses and asked to see the security system. The owner, a middle-aged man with a restless look, hesitated. He said he had already tried to view the recordings, but the file would disappear on its own every time it reached 2:37 a.m. He showed me the monitor. The video advanced normally, and suddenly, black screen. No noise, no interference, just absolute digital silence. This wasn't a technical malfunction. It was deliberate deletion. As I walked down the street, I noticed the surroundings seemed still. The sound of my footsteps echoed strangely, without return. Even the birds avoided that stretch. There were marks on the ground, small circular scratches on the asphalt, as if something had spun there forcefully. I took some samples, but I confess, I felt the urge not to look back. It was as if the air was being observed, and the observer knew that I knew. That night, I returned to the inn with a question that kept nagging at me. How does one erase a collective memory, leaving only silence as a witness? And why on that particular street, at that time, and with those people? When I began to review my notes, I noticed something curious. The letters in my handwriting, on the pages from that afternoon, were different. More shaky, misaligned. As if someone else had written for me. It was on the third day that I found the diary. It was hidden inside a locked drawer in the room of Elisa, the teacher who still drew invisible circles with her finger. The key, curiously, was inside a dead flower pot, as if someone wanted me to find it, but only at the right moment. The first pages were banal, routine notes about classes, literary quotations. But then, the tone changed. The sentences became short, nervous, almost meaningless. She read passages such as, "The sound returned tonight, and the eyes in the mirror blink out of time." Elisa described the sensation of being watched, but not by someone. By something. A presence that didn't breathe but pulsed around her. The last legible page bore only one line written forcefully. "They are coming, but no one will remember." The following pages were torn out, leaving traces of ink and fingernail marks. The paper seemed ripped in despair. I picked up the diary with gloves and smelled the metallic scent of the ink, too strong to be ordinary. With each line, it was as if Elisa was trying to leave me a message, a coded warning. She mentioned a blue sound, a frequency that lulls you to sleep, and a voice that returns in the early hours of the morning. Reading it, I realized that the phenomenon might not be merely psychological. Perhaps it was something deeper, something that invaded the mind of anyone who got too close to the mystery. I put the diary in the evidence folder and closed the window. Outside, the wind blew with the same rhythm as the words that still echoed in my head. "They are coming. Who are they? And what exactly were they coming for?" When I looked in the mirror before bed, I swear that for a brief second I saw Elisa's reflection, standing behind me, her lips moving silently, as if trying to remember what she should never have forgotten. I spent a good part of the following day with the victims' psychological reports. Each one seemed like a broken mirror, reflecting fragments of the same trauma. The pattern was always the same: lapses in identity, apathetic behavior, and a kind of fear that had no name. No medication had any effect. The psychiatrists called it extreme dissociative amnesia, but something inside me told me that wasn't what it was. Their emptiness had a personality. I decided to interview them again, this time with a hidden recorder. I wanted to observe the pauses, the micro-expressions, what was hidden between one word and another. At times, I realized that they were all repeating identical phrases without realizing it, as if they were sharing a memory that wasn't theirs. Elisa would say, "Light comes before sound." Lucas would add, "And sound takes what it wants." And Bruna, in a low voice, would whisper, "No one comes back the same after the frequency." It was too rehearsed to be a coincidence. I showed the recordings to a neuropsychologist who owed me a favor from a long time ago. He listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor. After a while, he said something that chilled me to the bone. "Those pauses. They're not human. There's a pattern between the words, as if another voice were synchronizing the responses." I asked him to repeat it, but he just shook his head, handed back the flash drive, and said, "Burn it." He never answered my calls again after that day. I returned to the inn thinking about something that had been haunting me from the beginning. What if the phenomenon wasn't just affecting the minds of the victims, but using their minds to express itself? Perhaps forgetting was the only way to break the cycle. But if that were true, what would happen to me now that I've started remembering too much? It was while analyzing an old emergency recording that I found the next clue. The call lasted only 40 seconds, a panicked woman saying that something was coming through the wall. At the end, before the line dropped, a low, steady sound filled the audio. It wasn't static. It was human. A kind of rhythmic hum, almost a muffled breath. At first I thought it was electrical interference, but the more I listened, the more I realized that sound didn't want to be heard. It wanted to get in. I amplified the waves in the file and discovered a strange pattern. A very specific frequency, between 19 and 20 Hz, a limit almost imperceptible to the human ear. Frequencies like this cause physiological reactions: dizziness, fear, hallucinations. Coincidence or manipulation? What's most disturbing is that this same interval has already been used in sensory induction experiments. I knew these stories. I knew they played with the human mind, and sometimes it didn't come back the same. I took the audio to the local radio technician. He was the kind of man who believed everything but doubted everyone. When he listened, he frowned and asked, "Are you sure you want to keep listening to this?" I replied that it was my job. He smiled a strange smile and whispered, "Be careful. Some sounds don't come from outside." At that moment, the light flickered and the equipment shut down by itself. The buzzing, however, continued. Inside the room. Inside me. That night, I recorded my own voice to test it. I spoke for 10 minutes, trying to keep my tone steady. When I played the audio back, there was something between the words. A second tone, almost imperceptible, accompanying each of my sentences, like a sonic shadow. I don't know what it was, but it sounded familiar. The same rhythm that Elisa drew with her finger in the air. That couldn't be a coincidence. I needed to go back to the site of the disappearances and hear the sound where it originated. I returned to the street where it all began, now in the early hours of the morning, guided only by my flashlight and the sound of my own heart. The wind blew softly, as if it didn't want to wake what slept there. And then I saw it again, the marks on the asphalt. Burnt circles, dark, too symmetrical to be natural. They seemed made by intense heat, but without any sign of flame. In the center of each one, the same pattern. 3 intertwined lines, forming something resembling an ancient symbol. I approached the first circle and felt the air change. A slight static ran across my skin, like when someone passes a magnet near your body. The sound, that almost human hum, vibrated in my ears again, even without any device turned on. I removed the frequency meter and, for a second, the screen captured the same value, 19.7 Hz. The same frequency as the recording. This confirmed the impossible: sound had form, and it left scars on the ground. While photographing the marks, I noticed something in the corner of my field of vision, a silhouette. Tall, motionless, a few meters away. I pointed the flashlight, but the light seemed to bend, as if refusing to touch that figure. A second later, it vanished. My heart raced, and my mind struggled to rationalize what I had seen. But instinct screamed, it wasn't human. I collected soil samples and moved away as quickly as I could, trying to ignore the feeling of being followed. Back at the inn, I analyzed the photos on the computer. In one of them, there was a shadow cast beside me, even without any visible light source. It was the same shape I saw on the street, observing, motionless. I stared at the screen, also motionless. In the next image, the shadow was no longer there, but a blur distorted the photo, as if something had passed through the lens. I took a deep breath. If I wanted to understand what was happening, I needed to discover who, or what, that presence was. The next morning, while I was reviewing the interviews, the innkeeper called me in a whisper. She said someone was watching me from across the street. I ran to the window and saw him, a tall, thin man wearing a dark coat and a hood that hid his face. He was standing there, motionless, as if he knew I was staring at him. When I rushed downstairs to confront him, he was simply gone. No sound of footsteps, no shadow turning the corner. Only the echo of my own quickened breathing. I asked the owner who that man was, and she, pale, replied, "He always appears when someone starts to remember." The sentence pierced me like a blade. Starts to remember what? I went back to the street and looked for cameras, witnesses, any trace. Nothing. The shops were locked, and the few residents avoided looking at me. A waiter, visibly nervous, whispered while cleaning a table, "He doesn't speak. But sometimes he repeats what we think." And then he pretended he never said that. Late in the afternoon, I found footprints on the sidewalk, partially erased by the rain. I followed them to the alley behind the radio station, the same one where the recordings had failed, and there, I found something on the ground, a cassette tape. No label, just the phrase, "Do not listen," scrawled in red ink. Of course I listened. The tape contained a familiar hum, and, amidst the distortions, a hoarse voice whispering my name. Katherine. It was the first time the phenomenon had called to me directly. I turned off the recorder and felt a shiver run down my spine. Through the bedroom window, I saw the hooded silhouette again, standing under the unlit lamppost. This time he seemed closer, almost clear. And for a moment, I could have sworn the hood moved slightly, as if smiling. I closed the curtains and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to rationalize my fear. If that man appeared when someone remembered, perhaps it was time to find out exactly what he was trying to protect. After the appearance of the hooded man, I realized the case had far greater ramifications than I had imagined. I contacted an old source, a former federal police officer, who owed me some favors. I asked for access to confidential reports on similar disappearances, and, to my surprise, he agreed. When I received the brown envelope with no return address, I felt the weight of what the world calls a secret. Inside were photos, reports, and something even more disturbing. Stamps that read "Classified Collective Neurological Anomaly." I carefully leafed through each page. All the cases followed the same pattern. Memory lapses, identical timing, inexplicable sounds, hooded figures observing from afar. And more, they all occurred in small towns far from major centers, as if they were isolated experiments. No one was ever convicted, and the investigations always ended the same way, without conclusive evidence. a bureaucratic stamp to hide something impossible to explain. And in the midst of all this, one name appeared repeatedly: Project Frequency. The name sounded familiar, like an ancient echo. I went to the archives of the Santa Mirela City Hall and, among piles of moldy documents, found a reference to the same project. A company contracted by the government had supposedly installed environmental monitoring equipment more than 20 years ago, exactly in the area where the disappearances began. But nobody in the city remembered these technicians. No photos, no records, nothing. It was as if they had never existed. I took a copy of the files to the inn and spread them all out on the table. While connecting the dots, I noticed something that made me stop. The Project Frequency stamp also appeared on an old investigation. Signed by me. The date? 3 years before the Santa Mirela case. And I didn't remember being there. The paper trembled in my hands, as if the past was beginning to whisper truths that my mind had tried to erase. In the following days, something began to change in me. Small lapses in memory, silly mistakes like letting the coffee get cold and swearing it was still hot, or looking at the clock and realizing the hands were moving backward. I thought it was just tiredness, until I realized my notes were changing on their own. Words I hadn't written appeared between the lines, in the same handwriting. "You've seen this before," one of them said. I looked at the paper, and the phrase seemed to stare back at me. One night, I noticed something strange in the bedroom mirror. When I got closer, I realized that the reflection didn't immediately follow my movements. There was a delay of a second, maybe 2. A subtle detail, but impossible to ignore. I stood there watching until the reflection blinked. I didn't blink. My body froze. I touched the glass and felt an electric shiver, as if a light current passed between me and that other me that seemed to be trying to imitate me. I decided to record the phenomenon. I turned on the camera and started talking, describing what I saw. When I reviewed the footage, what was on the other side wasn't exactly me. The face was paler, the gaze too fixed, and in the last seconds of the video, the reflection smiled, even with my neutral expression. It was the kind of smile that doesn't carry joy, only awareness. I turned everything off. The room fell silent, and for a moment, I had the sensation that the mirror was breathing. Since then, I've avoided looking directly at any reflective surface. The problem is that I've started seeing it in other places: shop windows, puddles of rain. Always a second late, always looking at me. Sometimes I think the reflection doesn't want to scare me, but to warn me. Maybe what it sees on the other side is what's coming from here. And if that's the case, maybe the next memory I lose will be precisely that of who I am. While reviewing the case evidence, I found an old box with my name scribbled on the lid. It was stored at the back of the police station's archives, and the strangest thing is that nobody knew how it got there. Inside, there were 3 audio tapes labeled only with dates. They all coincided with nights when I was supposedly sleeping at the inn. I put the first one in the recorder, and the sound that came out was my voice. But I didn't remember saying any of that. The recording began with heavy breathing. I said incoherent things, trying to describe the sound, the lights, the hooded man. Then the tone changed, my voice slowed, as if someone else were speaking for me. They're close. They're in the sound. Hearing that was like confronting a version of myself that knew more than I did. The second tape was even worse. I laughed. A muffled, mechanical laugh, repeating the same phrase. "You'll forget too." I paused the recorder, but it kept running on its own. The tape seemed to be playing backward, reproducing inverted sounds and whispered words that formed fragmented sentences. One of them, clear as a warning: "Don't trust the mirror." My blood ran cold. I tried to rewind, but the machine jammed. Suddenly, the familiar buzzing returned to fill the room, accompanied by a deep echo that made the floor vibrate. It was the same sound from the emergency recordings, only now, it was coming from inside the tape. I put everything in a sealed envelope and went outside for some fresh air. The night was dense, starless, and the air smelled of iron. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, measured, too calm for a hurried human being. When I looked, nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. Perhaps, I thought, these tapes weren't just recordings. Perhaps they were memories. Mine, recorded in another time, by a version of myself that already knew what was about to happen. I took the tapes to a local psychologist named Dr. Mario Dantas, a man with a calm voice and a gaze that seemed to pierce through you. He listened to everything in silence, without interrupting once. When the last tape ended, he asked me if I had ever considered the possibility of mental contagion. I explained that I didn't believe in mass hysteria, but he smiled slightly, as if he'd heard that before. Contagion doesn't always need words, Katherine. Sometimes it happens in silence. Dr. Dantes was talking about a type of phenomenon in which the human mind involuntarily connects to an external pattern, an idea, a frequency, even an emotion. According to him, the repetition of events in Santa Mirella could be the result of an unconscious synchronization, something that propagates not through touch, but through perception. Seeing, hearing, or thinking can be enough to resonate with it. The explanation made too much sense to be just a theory. As he spoke, I noticed something unsettling. The wall clock behind him was stopped. At 2:37, the same time. When I pointed it out, he simply said, "Don't worry, sometimes time goes into a trance too." The phrase kept hammering in my head for the rest of the day. And the more I tried to push it away, the more it fit into everything that had been happening. Maybe it wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe it was a psychic contamination, a mental echo spreading from consciousness to consciousness. I returned to the inn and spent hours staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what resonance meant. Was I, by investigating the case, also being tuned in? In the early morning, I heard the sound again. This time, it seemed to come from inside my head, not from the environment. I closed my eyes and saw flashes. The marks on the floor, the hooded man, the smiling reflection. It was as if everything was connected, and I was finally beginning to remember what I shouldn't. Dr. Dantes suggested I undergo a session of regressive hypnosis to try to access any blocked memories related to the case. At first, I hesitated. I've always been skeptical about this type of approach, but curiosity, and perhaps desperation, got the better of me. The office was dimly lit, and the sound of the metronome created an almost hypnotic cadence. I closed my eyes and let his voice guide me. "Go back to the night of the first call, Katherine. Just observe." The sensation was of falling. My body remained there, but my mind began to detach, floating among memories that didn't seem to be mine. I saw an open field surrounded by fog, and heard the same deep sound from the tapes, that pulsating rhythmic hum. Suddenly, flashes. Blue lights cutting through the darkness, muffled screams, people walking in circles. I tried to get closer and realized that one of them was Elisa. But her face changed, fragmented, until it took on mine. My breathing became heavy, the sound more intense. Dr. Dantes told me to stay calm, but his voice began to distort, to multiply. I heard whispers, many of them, saying things I couldn't understand. Then a flash. Everything disappeared. When I came to, I was sweating, my muscles trembling, and the clock in the room, which had previously shown 10 in the morning, was now stopped at 2:37. The doctor, pale, avoided looking at me. I asked what had happened, and he replied, "You started answering." Before I even asked the questions, I left there dazed, trying to piece together what I had seen. The memories were disjointed, but one thing struck me. Amidst the blue light, I was holding a badge. The badge bore the logo of Project Frequency. And the name. It was mine. Katherine L. Moore, lead investigator. My head spun. The truth began to seep into the cracks of my consciousness, but something was still missing. Physical proof that it wasn't all just a delusion. And I knew where to look for it. I went back to the room and spread all my records out on the bed, notes, recordings, photos, reports, Elisa's diary. I wanted to find a concrete link between it all. I started cross-referencing data, times, sounds, events. And there it was, the same numerical pattern repeated itself in different contexts. 19.7 Hz, 237, 3 intertwined circles. Everything converged on the same origin, like an invisible signature left in each case. A control pattern. A frequency designed to manipulate the unconscious. I turned to old, declassified military research files. In one of them, I found the term low-frequency neural induction. Experiments conducted during the 1980s, supposedly to test brain responses to sound stimuli. Project Frequency was cited as an independent, outsourced arm that studied the auditory threshold of human consciousness. The notes indicated that the goal was simple and frightening: to erase specific memories through modulated sound waves. I spent the night comparing the waveform graphs with the recordings of the case. And I realized something absurd. The frequency not only repeated itself, but adjusted to my own heart rate. Every time I listened, my pulse accelerated until it synchronized with the sound, as if the body were an antenna and the mind, a receiver. That was it. The sound didn't invade. It awakened. It was a primitive, direct form of communication that didn't need words to act. At dawn, I looked out the window and saw the hooded man again, standing motionless under the lamppost. But this time, something was different. He was wearing headphones. When the sunlight touched the hood, I saw a metallic reflection, a symbol, the same as the circles on the asphalt. He knew I had discovered the pattern, and for some reason he seemed pleased. That could only mean one thing. There was a place where the sound was born. A laboratory. And I needed to find it. The coordinates of Project Frequency led me to an isolated area, a few kilometers from Santa Mirella. A plot of land surrounded by barbed wire, overgrown with weeds and shrouded in silence. The main gate was ajar, creaking in the wind, and a nearly faded sign still bore the project's logo. I entered slowly, guided by the weak beam of my flashlight. The air inside was damp, heavy, and the ground was covered in yellowed papers and broken glass. It felt as if time had been frozen along with the machines. In one of the rooms, I found old recording equipment, tapes, antennas, receivers, and a central panel still powered by a generator. The noise of the vacuum tubes sounded familiar. The same hum from the recordings. The walls were covered with charts and notes about mental patterns, brainwaves, and in the center an underlined phrase, "Erase to protect." That laboratory wasn't seeking to understand the human mind. It was editing it, and the people who disappeared were part of the experiment. I went down to the basement and found a colder room, protected by metal doors. At the back, sealed record boxes with name labels. Elisa, Lucas, Bruna, and dozens of others. I opened one and saw photos, exams, and numbered tapes. Everything meticulously catalogued. There was also a badge hanging there, mine. Chief Investigator, Field Sector B. My stomach churned. The memories of the hypnosis began to make sense. I wasn't just the investigator on this case. I was part of it. Suddenly, the sound began again. Faint at first, then more intense, coming from the walls, the machines, myself. The flashlight flickered, and a blue light flooded the room. I closed my eyes, but I saw everything: the victims, the hooded man, the previous cities. A cycle repeated endlessly. When the sound ceased, I was on my knees, panting, and the door behind me was open. Someone had followed me there. And for the first time I felt fear. Not of what I would find, but of what I would remember. After what I saw in the lab, everything started to fall apart. The streets of Santa Mirella seemed different, as if the entire city had been rebuilt overnight. People walked more slowly, with strangely serene expressions, and the sounds were muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. When I tried to talk to the sheriff, he looked at me as if he had never seen me before. Elisa's diary, the tapes, even my notes, had disappeared. I returned to the inn, but the room was empty, without my bags, without any trace that I had been there. The owner greeted me with the same smile as always and said, "Looking for lodging, dear?" That chilled me to the bone. I picked up my cell phone, no signal. No call logs, no photos of the incident. It was as if my own presence was being erased, one pixel at a time. The sound, once distant, now pulsed inside my head, rhythmic, demanding. The emptiness was returning, and this time it was coming for me. In the early morning, I heard knocking at the door. 3 knocks. Always 3. I waited, but no one answered. When I opened it, the hallway was shrouded in fog, and there at the end, the 3 victims were watching me, motionless, their eyes completely white. Elisa stepped forward, and in unison they said, "Memory is prison." Then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was sitting in the middle of the street, exactly where the circles had been marked. The watch on my wrist? 2:37 a.m. Dawn arrived, but the sun seemed unwilling to pierce through the clouds. I wandered aimlessly until I realized that each step left circular marks on the ground, like the ones I had photographed days before. The conclusion was inevitable, albeit painful. The phenomenon had not only enveloped me, it had absorbed me. I was now part of the same cycle. And deep down, I began to understand what Elisa meant in her diary. They are coming, but no one will remember. Perhaps she wasn't warning the world. Perhaps she was talking to me. I returned to the lab, determined to find proof that all of this was real, or at least, that I wasn't losing my sanity. But when I got there, the land was completely clear. No buildings, no fences, nothing. Just grass and silence. It was as if the place had never existed. I grabbed the GPS and checked the coordinates. It was the exact same spot. The background sound began to vibrate, and I realized that the emptiness wasn't absence. It was too much presence. I started remembering flashes that came in short waves, like stolen memories trying to return. Me inside the lab, signing reports. Distorted voices giving me instructions. "Restart the cycle, Katherine." The badge around my neck, the symbol on the documents, the sound pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. Everything made sense now. I had been part of the project from the beginning, and the role of investigator was just the surface. I was there to make sure no one remembered. Not even me. Suddenly, the hooded man appeared again. But this time he removed the hood. The face. It was mine. Pale, exhausted, with eyes that carried the memory of all the versions I had forgotten. "You asked to forget," he said in a serene tone. "But the sound always returns." Before I could react, he dissolved into static, leaving only the echo of his own voice in the air. I fell to my knees, stunned, with the sensation that my mind was fragmenting into 1,000 pieces of memory. When the sound ceased, the wind carried one last sheet of paper, which fell at my feet. It was a report with my name at the top and a single handwritten note. Final stage, reintroduction of primary memory. The sentence seemed to glow for an instant before fading along with the rest of the paper. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. The city was silent. But inside my head, something was awakening. I finally understood what the void wanted. And it wasn't finished with me yet. A few days later, I woke up in my office in another city with no memory of how I got back. The desk was organized, the papers stacked, the computer running with the Santa Mirella case report, dated 3 years ago. Every line of the document seemed to have been written by me, but I couldn't remember a single word. Beside it, a silver flash drive with a simple label, "Last Audio." My hands trembled, but I knew I needed to listen. I plugged in the flash drive and pressed play. It was my voice, calm, serene, describing the same events I had just experienced. Every detail, every sensation, every pause. But there was something different in the tone. It sounded like an older, more tired version of myself. At the end of the recording, the voice said, "If you are listening to this, it's because the cycle has begun again. And if you remember, it will be too late." Then the sound. The same buzzing. Only now, it was coming from everywhere, including from inside me. I looked around, trying to understand what was real. In the reflection of the window, I saw the hooded man standing behind me. When I turned, there was no one there. I looked back at the glass and realized the reflection was smiling. That same smile that had haunted me since the mirror at the inn. That's when I realized, maybe he had never left. Maybe he was what remained of me, the part that keeps remembering while the rest forgets. Memory is the cruelest of mirrors. I turned off the audio, but the sound wouldn't stop. It began to fill the room, vibrating in my bones, as if the air were transforming into memory. I picked up the recorder and pressed rec. The last sentence I recorded still echoes when I close my eyes. "My name is Katherine Moore. I was in Santa Mirella. And if you're hearing this, it's because you've forgotten too." The sound grew, swallowed everything, and then silence. You know, after everything I experienced in Santa Mirella, I learned that the answers aren't always in the tests. Sometimes they're in the silences. The human mind is a labyrinth. The more you try to get out, the more you realize you've been there before. And maybe that's what forgetting does. It protects us from what we're not yet ready to remember. But the danger is when someone discovers how to use silence to control what you feel, what you dream, and even what you believe to be real. I don't know if the sound is still active, if Project Frequency still exists, or if it's all just an echo that refuses to die. I only know that, every now and then at 2:37 a.m., the clock stops for a second, and the air seems to hold its breath. At those times, I close my eyes and remember Elise's words. They are coming, but no one will remember. And I wonder, is forgetting really the worst punishment in the end? Perhaps the real investigation isn't about what happened that night, but about what still happens inside each of us. Because we all have memories we prefer to bury, and secrets that time tries to erase. But time, it never truly erases. It just waits for us to come back. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you also wanted to remember. So, if you want to continue delving with me into the shadows that the mind tries to hide, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are still many cases waiting to be remembered, and perhaps the next one is much closer than you imagine.